All right, so I'm gonna be doing the takeaway for pretty much every one of the 32 teams in the entire NFL. Um, the way I'm gonna do this, I'm just gonna go down this list. I'm just gonna go from left to right from the top. I'm going in that order. To start us off, it's the Buffalo Bills. Um, their takeaway from this year is that it was an epic failure. um, Josh Allen was regressing this year. They have we found out they had absolutely no run game. We went into this year thinking that they were I at least thought I had them win the Super Bowl, and through the first 2 weeks they looked fine, and then you began to see the holes in their run game. Josh Allen had his moments where he was just playing bets. So their biggest takeaway from this year was that maybe we jumped the gun on how good this team was because they choked by the end of it. For the Baltimore Ravens, obviously their season was kind of like destroyed when Lamar Jackson went out, and that's the big takeaway from this year. This is not a good football team without Lamar Jackson. Their defense still has pretty good guys like Marlon Humphrey and other people, but when you take out a guy like Lamar Jackson to this team, a team that's offense is entirely constructed through Lamar Jackson, then it doesn't even make them a good team at that point. With Huntley, they were bad. They were pretty awful. They couldn't do anything offensively. And now the biggest question going into next year is who's going to be the quarterback for this team next year? Because Lamar Jackson, I don't know if they're going to pay him. And if they don't pay him, he's made it very clear he doesn't want to pay. So their takeaway from this year for me is that without Lamar Jackson, they're pretty bad. Houston, um, clear rebuild year from them. They were playing Davis Mills. The downside of their years, they somehow didn't get the number one pick, but towards the end they started playing a little bit better. I don't think there were any expectations at all going into the season, and from what we saw some people start to get better, start to develop a little bit. So I mean, next year they should have Bryce Young next year, so long as a trade doesn't ruin it for them or something. But overall, what we expected kind of was the takeaway of this team. Clear rebuild year. They get a nice draft pick in the selection. Um, it was a low risk, low reward season. That's what it was. Denver, wow. Um, they tanked. A lot of people, including me, I thought that they were going to be a much better team through this. And then obviously Russell Wilson, he comes out playing flat. Nathaniel Hackett just was not the fit there at all. He just didn't look like he was doing it, and they just were awful. They had an awful year, awful. They just couldn't put it together, seemingly at all, and the record showed for it. And the thing that sucks for them is they don't even have their pick. But I mean, the biggest takeaway is their offense needs to look better next year. They looked pretty bad, and going into next year, we'll see. You've put in Sean Payton's now the head coach, but if you go out and you lay an egg like that, it can't happen. Cowboys, obviously, I made the video about them earlier about how Dak Prescott needs to step up in big moments and how it was that through the year they had a great year, but once again the story is the same. They cannot execute in the postseason at all. That's a game against the 49ers that they should have won, and they didn't. I have a whole nother video on this, but just their takeaway once again, as even worse as I think this playoff loss is, because they should not have lost this game to Brock Purdy. But even as bad as it is, the story and the takeaway once again remains the same. No postseason success. They can't do any successful things in the postseason. So they need to get that corrected. But as of right now, that's the only takeaway we can have with them. Good regular season team, bad postseason team. The Bears, the thing is, I don't really know what we got out of the Bears after this because through several of the weeks, it looks like Justin Fields is the guy. But the question is what he's doing on the field sustainable? Like by the end of this, his body was broken, and he also was having a lot of issues. Well, maybe the team in general, maybe not just so much him, is they couldn't close games. They couldn't on final drives of the games. They just came up short. They would lose a lot of games in the fourth quarter. They might have been in like 10 or 11 games that were like 1 point games. I think they lost every single one of them. So if we're talking about a team here who has the number one pick through this, but we're talking about a team here who, if you flip those games like the Vikings did, and we'll get to the Vikings later, who knows what could happen? They could maybe run the table on some stuff. Like they were in a lot of games. This team, they had a shot in a lot of games, but obviously the retrospective is they got the number one pick. What are they going to do with it? Hopefully defense. Hopefully they trade down and they get like more assets and stuff, but we'll see. But I didn't think they'd be this bad either. But they were in a lot of close games. Usually, young teams like this that are in a lot of close games come back the next year and are a much better team. So I think their takeaway for me is that I think that they're doing some of the right things on the rise. It's big. They got that number one pick. They can use it in certain packages. But the real question next year, it's gonna be Justin Fields and what he can do. As for the Atlanta Falcons, once again, kind of like the Texans, standard rebuild year for them. Um, Not much was done with them. I think they were a very boring team to watch. Obviously, they were playing Mariota. Mariota's more of a bridge quarterback for that year. They ended with Desmond Ritter. They're probably going to be in the QB market next year. I doubt that they play Desmond Ritter. Desmond Ritter was actually playing pretty well towards the end, but it was a pure rebuild looking year for them. They had Cordell Patterson in there a little bit. They were probably the most boring team in the league this year, maybe by far. But that's just what it was with them. Nothing that stood out like outside of the box. Then Arizona, disappointment, complete disappointment. You go into what was you come off the backs of what was last year, and I think they got into that like 8-0, 10-0 start, whatever it was. They looked good, and we came into this year, and there were questions about can Kyler Murray stay healthy, and D Hop's not going to be there for the first couple weeks, but can he execute still? Is Cliff Kingsbury still the guy? And by the end of it, it just all imploded. Pretty much all of it. The GM stepped down. Cliff Kingsbury isn't there anymore. Kyler Murray got hurt. Pretty much the worst nightmare scenario for them. They only won like one game at home. Pretty much disaster year for the Arizona Cardinals. Coming off the backs of what was a good year that was just tarnished by an early postseason loss. So definitely a disappointing year. Their takeaways are just that can Kyler Murray still be your franchise quarterback? Are you going to make the right move at coach? And can you rebuild this team properly? Can people stay healthy? Is a big question with that. Big question with that is can people stay healthy? And due to the runtime of these videos, what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to do a line of these a video because with some of these teams, there's just too much to talk about. Like this row will probably be an own video in itself that'll take a while. So yeah, we'll do it by row. This video captured the top 8, just the first 8 teams that were on there. So we'll continue this through another one, but those are the takeaways for the Bills, the Ravens, the Texans, the Broncos, the Cowboys, the Bears, the Falcons, and the Arizona Cardinals. Those are the takeaways for those teams. Be back in a future video.